Be Me, this probably isn't the kind of site where people my age usually hang out, but I learned that feminism is often discussed here. My name is Sandra, and I'm 65 years old. I'm an academic, a second-wave feminist. I need you to understand who I was, so you can understand what I've become. I was what you'd call a second-wave feminist. Not the modern kind, but one of the originals. I was there in the 70s. I marched, I wrote pamphlets, I debated in university halls until my voice was hoarse. My friends and I weren't just activists. We were architects of a new world. I remember a time when a woman's life path was a straight line drawn by someone else. School, marriage, children, done. Your name, your credit, your entire public identity was an extension of your husband. We saw that world and we said, no more. We fought for everything. The right to choose, the right to equal pay, the right to our own careers, our own identities. I dedicated my entire adult life to this cause. I became a professor, teaching gender studies at a well-regarded college. I wrote books with titles that were meant to be provocative, to challenge the status quo. Books that argued the very structure of society was designed by men, for men. And for decades, I watched as the world bent to our will. Laws changed. Opportunities opened up. The glass ceiling got 1,000 cracks in it. I saw my female students go on to become doctors, lawyers, engineers, and CEOs. They were confident, articulate, and fiercely independent. They were the daughters of the revolution my generation had started. For years, I felt a deep, profound sense of pride, a sense of victory. We had won. We had taken a broken, unjust world and fixed it. I truly believed that. I thought I was on the right side of history. I was a hero in my own story. Turns out, every story has more than one side. The first sign that something was wrong, the first tiny crack in my perfect world, was my son, Danny. He's 40 now. By every measure my world valued, he was a success. He's an architect, a good one. Smart, creative, runs his own small firm, earns more than enough money to be comfortable. He's fit, he reads, he can hold a conversation. He's a good man. I raised him to be one, and he is completely, utterly alone. It wasn't for a lack of trying on my part. For years, I saw his single status as a problem to be solved. I had a whole roster of perfect young women in my orbit, my brightest former students, the daughters of my friends. I remember one in particular, a woman named Catherine, a brilliant lawyer, just made junior partner at her firm, sharp, witty, ambitious. I thought she was perfect for him. I arranged a dinner. I called him the next day, excited, expecting to hear the good news. His voice was flat. He told me the evening was fine. He explained that she was a wonderful person. He admired her intelligence and her drive. But then he said something that stuck with me. He said, "Mom, the entire dinner felt like an interview. She wasn't looking for a partner. She was looking for a co-CEO for her life project. And the position had to be filled by someone who wouldn't get in her way." I dismissed it at the time. I told him he was being too critical. A few months later, I tried again. This time with a different type of woman. An artist, free-spirited, had her own gallery. I thought maybe the corporate intensity of the lawyer was the problem. The same story repeated itself. Danny called me after their date. He said she was talented and passionate. But he said he felt like an accessory, someone whose job was to applaud her journey of self-discovery. After that second attempt, he asked me to stop, politely but firmly. It was during that conversation that he said the line that really started all of this. "Mom, they're great women, but they don't need me. They don't need a man at all. They just want someone to admire them while they do everything themselves." I didn't understand it then. My feminist programming interpreted his words as a weakness. I thought, he's intimidated by successful women. It was a simple, easy explanation that fit my worldview perfectly. I was wrong. It wasn't simple at all. After that conversation with Danny, I started paying attention, really looking at the world around me, not just seeing the version I wanted to see. I started noticing the men, or rather, the lack of them. I'd go to the local park on a weekend afternoon. It would be filled with life, but it was almost entirely a world of women and children, mothers coordinating playdates, sharing snacks, pushing swings, grandmothers watching toddlers. The few men who were there seemed like visitors in a foreign land. They'd be on the periphery, checking their phones, or they'd be there for a brief custody exchange, a quick, awkward handover before retreating. There was no sense of a shared community space for families. It was a maternal space. I noticed it in cafes and restaurants, too. I'd see tables of 4, 5, 6 women laughing and talking animatedly, celebrating birthdays, promotions, or just a Tuesday. The men in the same cafe were almost always alone, sitting with a laptop and headphones, creating an invisible wall around themselves. They weren't interacting. They were just occupying space, quietly and separately. The most jarring moments came during family gatherings, holidays, birthdays, that sort of thing. It became a predictable pattern. My nieces, young women in their late 20s and early 30s, would hold court. One would talk about her promotion, another about buying her own apartment, a third about her solo trip through South America. Their stories were the center of the conversation. They were dynamic, exciting, full of forward momentum. Then, someone would turn to one of my nephews. The energy in the conversation would immediately shift. They'd answer politely, "Work is fine." "Yes, I'm still living in the same place." Then, as quickly as possible, they would turn to their brother or cousin and start a quiet, separate conversation. The topics were always the same: a new piece of computer hardware, a complex strategy in a video game, the stats of a fantasy football league. They were physically present in the room, but mentally they had checked out. They had retreated into worlds of complex rules and measurable achievements, worlds where their efforts produced clear, predictable results. They weren't rude or unhappy. They were just absent. It was like watching society split into two different species. The women were leaning in, taking over the world. The men were quietly leaning out. For a while, my academic brain worked overtime to rationalize all of this. I had a framework for everything, a theory for every observation. The explanation was obvious, wasn't it? For centuries, men had benefited from a system that gave them an unfair advantage: patriarchy. They were handed power, status, and authority simply for being men. My generation had successfully dismantled that system. We had leveled the playing field. So, naturally, the men were struggling. They were like athletes who had only ever played with a head start, and now that the race was fair, they couldn't keep up. They were falling behind because they weren't used to real competition. Their retreat into video games and hobbies wasn't a choice. It was a symptom of their inability to cope. They had become infantile, passive, unable to function in the new world of equality we had built. This theory felt so right, so intellectually neat. It confirmed everything I already believed. I became excited. This was a story that needed to be told. It would be my magnum opus, the final crowning achievement of my career. I even had a title for the book I would write: The Twilight of Patriarchy, a study of masculinity in decline. I pictured it winning awards. I would document the last gasps of the old world, the confusion of men left behind by progress. It was going to be a triumphant final chapter to my life's work. I started gathering my notes, outlining chapters. I talked about it with my old colleagues from the university. They loved it. They told me it was a vital, necessary work. Our echo chamber was perfectly soundproof. My first step, I decided, would be to conduct a series of interviews. And the first and most important subject would be my own son, Danny. He would be my key case study. I called him and arranged to meet at his apartment. I told him it was for my new book. I came prepared, not as a mother, but as a researcher. I had my notebook, my list of questions, my pre-formed conclusions. His apartment was exactly what you'd expect from an architect. Clean, minimalist, everything in its right place, a space of order and control. It was the home of a man who had his life figured out, which was an immediate, if small, contradiction to my infantile thesis. We sat down. I opened my notebook. I started gently, trying to guide him towards the answers I wanted. I asked him if he felt that modern life was more competitive, if he felt pressured by the success of the women around him. He was quiet for a moment, looking at me. It wasn't an angry look, just a tired one. He said, "Mom, can we just be honest? No academic theories, no buzzwords, just the truth." I agreed. I put my pen down, and then he just laid it all out. He told me it had nothing to do with being intimidated or afraid of competition. He called it a simple risk assessment, a cost-benefit analysis. He started with dating. He said from his perspective, modern dating feels like a series of job interviews for a position he's not even sure he wants. He's expected to initiate, to plan, to pay. He's expected to be charming, funny, and interesting. He is, in every sense, the one being judged. He is the performer. And what is the woman's role? To be the judge, to decide if he is worthy of her time and attention. He said, "I have to prove my value from the first minute. She just has to show up." Then he moved on to relationships. He talked about the constant work a relationship now requires, the endless processing of feelings, the constant communication, the navigation of unspoken rules and tests. He said it felt like a second, unpaid job and one with a very demanding boss. He talked about the legal landscape. This was the part that really silenced me. He had a friend from college, a guy named Mark. Mark had gotten married young, built a business from scratch. His wife decided she was unhappy a few years ago. She left him. In the divorce, she got the house, half the business he had built, and substantial alimony. They didn't even have kids. Danny said, he did everything right. He provided, he was faithful, he worked hard, and his reward was being financially ruined in his late 30s. Why would I ever sign up for that kind of risk? He saw the look on my face and kept going. He asked me to honestly consider the upside. What was the grand prize for navigating this minefield successfully? Marriage? A partnership where your assets are legally on the line, based on someone else's fluctuating happiness. A family, where the courts in most places will overwhelmingly favor the mother if things go wrong, potentially limiting your access to your own children. He looked at me directly and said, "The social contract is broken, Mom. We are still expected to fulfill all the traditional roles of a man, to provide, to protect, to be the stable one. But we have no authority, no security, and no respect for doing it. All of the responsibilities, none of the traditional rewards. It's the worst of both worlds." He then contrasted this with his current life. He gets up in the morning. He goes to a job he finds challenging and rewarding. He makes good money. In the evenings, he can go to the gym, work on a personal project, or just read a book in peace. On weekends, he can go hiking or meet up with friends for a low-drama hangout. His money is his own. His time is his own. His home is his sanctuary. He said, "My life is peaceful. It's calm. Why would I voluntarily trade this peace for the near-constant chaos, risk, and expense of a modern relationship?" I just sat there. My notebook was closed on the table. Every word he said was delivered with a calm, detached logic. This wasn't the emotional complaint of a man-child who couldn't cope. It was the rational conclusion of an intelligent adult who had looked at the game and decided the only winning move was not to play. I had come there as a researcher to study a subject. I left feeling like my entire life's work had just been declared a failure by its most intimate product, my own son. My book felt like a joke. The title was right, but the reason was all wrong. It wasn't dying, it had been killed, and I was one of the people holding a weapon. The conversation with Danny left me reeling. It was like someone had flipped a switch in a dark room, and I was suddenly seeing things that had been there all along. My entire intellectual foundation was shaken. The neat, tidy theories I had built my career on now felt flimsy and hollow. His logic was cold, but I couldn't find a flaw in it. He wasn't speaking from a place of anger or resentment. He was speaking from a place of calculated self-preservation. I needed more data. I needed to know if he was an anomaly, or if this was a widespread sentiment. My academic instincts took over, but this time, my research subject wasn't something I could find in a university library. I did something I would have considered unthinkable just a few weeks prior. I went online. I created an anonymous account and ventured into the spaces my colleagues and I had always spoken of in hushed, horrified tones. Male-centric forums, online communities, places we had long ago dismissed as hotbeds of misogyny. I braced myself for the worst. I expected a tidal wave of hatred, of vitriol directed at women. I expected to be disgusted, to have my old beliefs confirmed. But that's not what I found. Yes, there was anger, a lot of it. But it wasn't the unhinged, baseless hatred I had been led to expect. It was the anger of exhaustion, the anger of betrayal. Beneath the anger, the dominant emotion was a profound sense of grief. I spent hours, then days, just reading. I read thousands of stories, posted by anonymous men from all over the world. A man who worked 2 jobs to put his wife through medical school, only for her to leave him for a doctor at her hospital the year she graduated. A father whose ex-wife moved their children across the country without his consent, leaving him with a massive child support bill for kids he could now only see on a screen. A young college student whose life was derailed by a false accusation from a girl he had politely turned down for a date. He was expelled without a hearing, his reputation destroyed. The story was quietly recanted months later, but the damage was done. There were stories about dating, all echoing what Danny had told me. Stories of being treated as a disposable wallet, of being subjected to endless tests, of being ghosted after one perceived misstep. There were stories about marriage, about men who felt more like an ATM and handyman than a husband, men who felt completely alone within their own homes. It was a torrent of pain. They weren't hating women. They were mourning the loss of trust. They were mourning the loss of the idea of partnership. They were men who had tried to play the game by the rules they were taught, only to find the rules had been changed without their knowledge, and the game was now rigged against them. They were tired, so incredibly tired of being told they were the problem, tired of being told their struggles weren't real, tired of being the default villain in every social narrative. I felt sick. These weren't the privileged, whining patriarchs of my theories. These were just men, regular men, and they were hurting. This wasn't a backlash to feminism. It was a consequence, a direct, logical, and devastating consequence of the world we had created. That was when the biggest piece of the puzzle clicked into place. My epiphany didn't come in a flash of lightning. It was a slow, dawning horror. We, the feminists of my generation, had made a colossal error in our calculations. Our entire movement was based on changing the rules for women. We demanded that society change to accommodate our new roles, our new freedoms. And we succeeded. But we never, ever stopped to think about how those changes would affect men. We saw men not as partners in a shared society, but as an obstacle. The patriarchy wasn't a system we were all a part of. It was an enemy army that had to be defeated. So we unilaterally rewrote the social contract and then acted surprised when men refused to sign it. Look at what we did, piece by piece. We told women, you don't have to be a housewife. You are not obligated to cook and clean for a man. And that was a good thing. But we didn't remove the centuries-old expectation on men to be the primary provider. So his burden remained, while a key part of the traditional partnership was removed. We told women, your body, your choice. You have a right to sexual liberation. Another good thing. But we left in place the immense social pressure on men to be the initiators, the performers, the ones responsible for a woman's pleasure. Failure on his part was still a source of shame, while she now had total freedom without social consequence. We fought to make divorce easier, so the woman could leave a relationship where she was unhappy. Also a noble goal. But we then built a legal system where, in the vast majority of cases, the man who is left bears the maximum financial and personal cost, often losing his home and access to his children in the process. We removed his security. We demanded that men change. We told them to abandon their toxic, traditional masculinity. We told them to be more open, more vulnerable, more in touch with their emotions. But the moment they showed vulnerability, they were often perceived as weak and unattractive. We told them to be gentle and respectful, but then complained that there were no real men anymore. We created an impossible checklist for the ideal man. He must be strong, but soft, a leader, but an equal partner, confident, but not arrogant, ambitious and successful, but always available. He had to be a warrior and a poet, a provider and a nurturer. He had to split the household chores 50-50, even if he worked 60 hours a week and she worked 20. He had to be a stoic rock in a crisis, but also be emotionally available on demand. He had to respect her independence, but God forbid he let her open her own door or carry her own heavy bag. We created a character that could not possibly exist, and then we condemned every real man for failing to be him. I started to think about what masculinity had traditionally been about. What were the core pillars of a man's identity for most of human history? To be a provider, to be a protector, to be a builder, to be a father. Then I looked at what our movement had done to those pillars. Provider? We told him, I have my own career, I don't need your money. But we still, by and large, expected him to earn more than us. His role as provider was demoted from a necessity to an optional bonus. Yet the expectation remained. Protector. We told him, I'm a strong, independent woman. I don't need you to protect me. We called chivalry condescending. Then we complained that men weren't gentlemen anymore, and that we didn't feel safe. Builder. We devalued physical labor and the trades, the very jobs that built the world around us. We called it unskilled work, and pushed everyone towards white-collar knowledge careers. We mocked men who worked with their hands. Father? We created a legal system where his connection to his children was fragile and could be severed on the whim of their mother. He was demoted from patriarch to, at best, a co-parent, and, at worst, a visitor in his own children's lives. We didn't just give women new roles. We actively dismantled and devalued the traditional roles of men. We took away their purpose. We stripped them of their function in the family and in society, a function that had been core to their identity for millennia. And we offered them absolutely nothing in return. We just told them to be better. This new, horrifying clarity forced me to look back at my own life, at my own marriage. My husband, Richard, passed away about a decade ago. He was a good man, a quiet man. He worked at a manufacturing plant for 35 years. It was hard, physical work. That job paid the mortgage on our house. It paid for my advanced degrees. It paid for Danny's childhood. And how did I repay him? I remember being embarrassed by his job at university functions. I would describe it vaguely, trying to make it sound more important than it was. I remember telling him that his work wasn't intellectually stimulating. I was so arrogant. His work built things, real, tangible things. My work? I wrote papers that maybe a dozen people ever read. He loved fishing. Once a month, he'd get up before dawn and go out on the lake with a couple of his buddies from the plant. It was his one thing. I called it his escape from family responsibility. I tried to make him feel guilty for it. I didn't see it as a way for him to decompress, to connect with other men. I saw it as a betrayal of our progressive family unit. I tried to change him. I pushed him to take night classes, to read the books I was reading. I wanted him to be someone else, someone more like me. I never stopped to appreciate who he was, a reliable, hard-working man who loved his family and did his best every single day. I thought I was enlightening him, but I was just slowly, methodically eroding his sense of self-worth. I did the same thing to Danny. When he was a teenager, he was obsessed with computers, building them, coding on them. I called it infantile. I told him he needed to be more social, more well-rounded. I pushed him into team sports he hated. I didn't realize he was at the forefront of a new world. His infantile hobby became the foundation of his very successful career as an architect who uses cutting-edge design software. I was so blind. In my crusade against the patriarchy, I had waged a private war against the men in my own life. I thought I was helping them. I thought I was freeing them. But I was just telling them that who they were, at their core, was wrong. So here we are. This is the world we built. It's a world overflowing with lonely, successful women in their 30s and 40s. Women who built incredible careers, who are financially secure, who have everything they thought they wanted. And they sit with their friends over brunch, complaining that there are no good men left. They never ask themselves why. They never consider that the good men looked at the deal being offered and politely declined. It's a world of young men who are retreating, not out of weakness, but out of a logical rejection of a system that is hostile to them. They retreat into virtual worlds where the rules are clear, effort is rewarded, and they can experience a sense of competence and achievement that the real world denies them. They retreat into the gym, focusing on the one thing they can control, their own bodies. They retreat into their work, becoming workaholics, because the office is a meritocracy that is less complicated than the dating market. They're not going to other women. They're just going their own way. And our society is crumbling as a result. Birth rates are plummeting in developed nations because forming a family has become an unacceptably risky proposition for the average man. Let's be brutally honest with ourselves. Let's stop using the pretty words. My generation of feminists didn't want equality. We wanted an advantage. We wanted to keep all the traditional female privileges, the right to be protected, to be provided for, to be cherished, and we wanted to take all the traditional male rights, the right to economic freedom, to personal autonomy, to sexual liberty. We wanted a world where men were still expected to bear the burdens of masculinity, the risk, the responsibility, the disposability, but without any of the authority or respect that traditionally came with it. We engineered a system that demands male sacrifice, but offers no reward. And when men, rationally, began to walk away from that system, we didn't self-reflect. We didn't ask, what did we do wrong? We just pointed our fingers and screamed, cowards, man-children, weaklings. But it isn't weakness. It's the quietest, most civil, and most devastating strike in human history. I don't know if this can be fixed. I honestly don't. The distrust is now bone deep on both sides. We've created generations of men and women who see each other as adversaries. Maybe my generation will go down in history as the architects of the lonely society, the women who, in their desperate pursuit of their own happiness, made happiness impossible for everyone. I'm not writing my book anymore. I threw all my notes away. Instead, I'm just sitting with this terrible truth. I look at my son, Danny, in his peaceful, quiet, solitary life, and I see the price of my victory. I wanted to give my daughters a world without limits, but in the process, I stole from my son the right to be a husband and a father. I stole his future. I came here to this anonymous corner of the internet, not to preach or to lecture. I came here to confess, to say that I see it now, I see you, and I am sorry. I am